things I want to address about addendums to dumb activity deep underground military bases is that there's a lot of intellectual property vault theft that goes on with children who have a life in the bases and outside of the bases, and a lot of creativity and works that are stolen and music that's made through cloning. The band Poe is one of them. Prisoners of Earth was the intended message behind that band. The song Dolphin was about helping kids in underwater sea bases. And there's another song about finding and reminding kids of an angel team, divine assistance that was with them, getting them through the programs. So when you see things like Orphan Black, a series like that would take an actual file or an event and like the Clone Party and turn it into something that is now in public format. But things like that actually did happen in underground bases where they would have clone parties and clone activities going on. Another band was Basia, Basia, that was like a Polish Poe, and that was a little music video made out of a clone party. More intellectual property vault theft. Okay, so a lot of files, a lot of things were taken from the minds of children, as I said, and made into various formats. The kids also saw very strange things, like I talked about previously with the pelican, or not the pelican, the tulip staircase that was in the Queen's house in the Greenwich Meridian area. Sometimes what would happen when children would interdimensionally battle, like the super soldier children did sometimes, is that they would see an entity manifest as a physical being spontaneously combust. And what happens in that decoupling process through divine light is that the gross darkness that they try to bring into a wormhole or a portal to operate in this reality gets thrown back into dry places, into the void where it came from. So it's like black goo would be manifesting as like a type of ash, as a type of explosion, and disintegrating into a non-existent form of matter. So after this, I would like to get into the House of Leaves. This also ties in with bases and super soldier children and the time travel program. It's a very multi-layered and complex story that is not, that's still only in partiality. It talks about different things like Pelican Black. It uses the supposed name of the writer of Poe's songs being ADD and a sister to the ghost author. Pelican Black also alludes to Pelafina and a dark aspect of a unstable mum from England that one of the kids named Johnny Boy had encountered in a time travel program. And what's also interesting, just dialing back one more time to Poe, is that the cage bed in a video that she does called Angry Johnny was made because of these diaries that are the House of Leaves diaries, that are actually time travel diaries, and diaries written by alters and meshed into different personas, kind of interlodging themselves together into intriguing and mysterious story at the same time. So when you see in the video Angry Johnny, There's a caged bed. It's in a deep underground military base itself. There's a skull and bones reference too. And the bed gets uncaged then and rolled up. And that means that they walked out of the base and they were high ranking operatives at the time. So there's also references in that video of Trigger Happy Jack, and you can't talk to Johnny Boy because he doesn't act like a human. Things like that. That also alludes to the series Maniac and his counterpart in the series Maniac being the Echo to him. Like a twin pairing that always will resonate and reverberate back as an echolocation. It shows different hand gestures. This bed kind of represents like a boxing pit too. And which also alludes to clone sports people, like old 1950s boxers that were beta tested as clones. There's also pictures laying on the bed in the video that allude to Trigger Happy Jack, Old West pictures, and being trigger happy with your hands. That was also clone assignments and missions. So getting into the House of Leaves. What is the House of Leaves? House of Leaves, essentially at the end where it leaves off, leaves you with kind of a comfort zone area through a bunch of darkness that it entails and takes you through, and all these like alternate reality, almost feeling like you're going to choose your own ending, but you never get there type of storyline. At the end, it talks about Yggdrasil and the Tree of Life that's built on leaves. But the opposite of that is the opposite of the Tree of Life, which you get into Black Kabbalah and being stuck in the cliff offs and the dark void spaces and zones, stuck in that opposite side of it, which is what the Black Ops felt like at times. So the story talks about echolocation. Some of the super soldier kids had this ability. Echo being used a lot as a cipher key and also referenced as a lover. Now the Ghost Rider, Johnny Boy, JT, Johnny Truant, also represents a time traveler because that was the name that the original Johnny Boy was called. And this kid grew up in the Kansas City base mainly. So it's also alluding to other deeper problems, like time dilation problems and a man being stuck in certain situations, and situational problems, which goes way deeper into physical decoupling of matter, like in the Philadelphia Project, when the guy was stuck with his physical matter in the side of a boat. That happened to the Ghost Rider quite a few times. And it happened so much that some of his bodies couldn't even be operational. And the AI would threaten to sacrifice Johnny Boy's original body to give his eyes to someone else, his face to someone else, to slit his throat and give his voice to someone else, so that he would basically just be like a bag of flesh that couldn't be whole in one place at one time, functioning properly and effectively. So what you get out of the real story of House of Leaves, which was a time agent story, is a side objective, I'll call it, agenda of what I call consciousness collectors. Now, some of the kids that were in the projects like Montauk and whatnot were actually a fused consciousness of like two dead boys that were at the Montauk Project. So what they're spitting in their narrative isn't really their own, and they're being used as a type of consciousness collectors. So you got to be careful and use discernment in these types of people that will be like alien contact facilitators and give themselves multiple names and talk about the multiverse constantly and being hooked up into various situations and things which are just AI ports and tethering them further into the synthetic realm. So they want you to get tethered into that as well and think and believe that you can be godlike, manifest your own reality, and have your own type of story ending without even connecting and aligning with the Most High God and your highest self, whose real identity only comes from that God mind. So they set themselves up for failure when people do that, and kids are programmed and designed to come out of the programs with that type of programming. So some of the kids that were used for time agents used their ability to send themselves data packages from future reference points, and that was what the whole internet was created for, and YouTube especially. So the character Johnny Truant calls himself that because he was always late for school. And these high-tech schools that a lot of the kids were trained at, like always being not able to be singularly occupied into one point and frame of reference. As Alice in Wonderland states, like, I'm late for a very important date, being run by the Black Hats, at the time the Mad Hatters. So the House of Leaves essentially ruffled a lot of feathers and caused a lot of controversy because it was released with instructions to be released over a period of 20 years. And the original ghostwriter still being unknown because it was a USAP, Unacknowledged Secret Access Program, time agent writing it. And he wrote it as if to stumble upon a dead man's transcripts, which was himself and him and his original body dying in the program, and meeting that and confronting it and working through that. So it's a psychological exercise and thesis all wrapped up in one. So it's written for him to read it, dissect it, and disseminate it and narrate it like a eulogy that's just happenstancely just having to come by this eulogy of himself, while at the same time trying to unlock letter codes that are written within it, mathematical codes, and then solve the labyrinth maze within it too. So that's where the multi-layered facets come in and the rabbit holes that you dig into. And this is also what Blade Runner was about. And trying to remember a soulmate and getting back to certain points to fix things and correct things, remembering a soulmate that had green eyes, and all those other time travel references that are heavily embedded all throughout the storylines. And then you also have side diaries and things that haven't been released yet. What we do have is the Whalestone letters referencing and pointing to the Catoosa blue whale and other factual time travel line events. And the Pisces being the statue that's at the Greenwich Meridian, the wolf monster that is venerated there also as a statue, and also being treated like a beast and operating like a beast, and how to turn around living like a beast and acting like a beast, the Beast in X-Men. There's also references to the Dollhouse throughout the book, which is about the Dollhouse series. That was a series based about clone operatives that came out of a Dollhouse base in LA. And that's also why Poe wrote the song about the sweet Spanish doll. And it also alludes to witnessing mafia experiences and the many-level tier system that programmers and controllers run people through, and all that they have their hands in and stocks in, like mafia experiences that were witnessed. That's where some of the gore and the brutal repressed memories try to bleed through into the House of Leaves too. to have some type of trauma release through that and writing that and then expounding upon that. And there's also things in there that kids truly experienced, like the kids were taken to places that I talked about before, like Wichita, Kansas, places that had Oz illusions connotated to them. The heart attack gun was used on some of these kids if they would time jump and they were caught hiding information and time jumping out of sync and step with everything that was supposed to be documented and observed and had tight lid control over. So the heart attack gun would be like a little pellet that would leave a red mark on your skin, and it would permeate into the skin, into the chest zone, and it would make you not be able to breathe. And your body collapses on the ground and you usually pass out, depending on the use of it and if a child could circumnavigate and try to conquer it. After a few times, some kids did, and then it didn't work on them anymore. You can die from it, but in other instances, some of the targets that were used, that had the gun used on them to punish them, made it through. There's also references in House of Leaves to Lemon Meringue and the House of Leaves Poe song about lemon meringue. Prisoners of Earth Hole, HOL. It has a lot of areas where you can reflect on things and a lot of patterns that are embedded within it too. There's indexes, there's codices, types of different codes, and alterations and illusions, and also aberrations. And there's also an allusion to Tesla Labs, Nikola Tesla Labs. And echo being a very important part of it. And there's things that just come out on the surface level and things that you have to dig deeper into. And then some areas you just hit a wall because it's like you're opening up interdimensional hallways and doors while you're reading the story, because the text is not completed yet and it's written from a time traveler's mindset. And white holes and black holes opening up, and time and patterns and eras of time kind of bleeding together like a watercolor picture, where the full context isn't yet fully positioned into the story from a first person standpoint. So it's kind of looking outside of the writer's self and selves, just to begin the architecture and the blueprints of the story is where it still lies. So it's still being written. So it's a very, it's like a grand psychological work, and a face-off of these deep traumatic fears that you have to face and eventually extinguish and fight and have victory over. So the Minotaur also represents the original Montauk Project and programmers making us go through Minotaur mazes there. And it also represents Peters Moon's book about the Minotaur maze and the Montauk program. Psychological frameworks, traumatic fears being purged out. Ash is in the book a lot, also representing Asheville, the Biltmore Mansion, North Carolina. Like a ghost, it's also written like a Ghost Recon love story. And it also mentions a white tiger with ashes on its back too. And Yggdrasil and the Tree of Life is also built on ashes, has ashes in it. And it's also alluding to the phoenix rising out of the ashes. It also talks about claw marks being on the wood. And we saw this at the Carson Mansion, at the Inglemore Club Mansion, Eureka, California area, where they actually had time-traveling Nazis residing in the mansion complex networks there. And stripping gold and all liquidated assets there into the Nazi bank system where they had enslaved the Rothschilds. So also in the House of Leaves, this whole is appendices. There's legends to upcoming files that will be released. It also reminds me of the story of Benjamin Button and a baby, young boy, old man standpoint that's like a split mirror type. It kind of goes back and forth between those two, like a blind experiment. And in one of the Pose videos too, she also has a bunch of suitcases, and these suitcases that are laying on the bed in Angry Johnny, these suitcases represent the hidden files of the rest of the Pelican poems that are time travels and going to various stations of identity and diaries being found out, and then Johnny Boy trying to hide diaries that his lover finds and freaks out about into the floor or various parts of this base room that they had been conditioned to and confined into for quite a long time. And in some of her other pictures in the albums shows child's hands touching her face, and that was actually hands that were a younger clone version of herself touching her face. Because there's various types of kids in bases, and they would be brought into different rooms. Some of the kids, they could use anything as a psychological means and measure. In the Nazi experimentation, that was perfected to just have unlimited resources to design trauma programs individually tailored to an operative. They could take your DNA and make something out of you and use that to try to traumatize you with. So some of the kids were versions of yourself there, and some of the kids were hybridized, and some of the kids were soulless, very creepy children that you didn't want to talk to or deal with or have encounters with, especially if they started touching you. So there's also suggestions in reading The House of Leaves. Post-exposure effects is called peer reading. And that's supposedly a model that people have tried to use, and then they try to base theories on the book, which none of them will be concrete. There's also allusions to 11 years, 11 Stranger Things, 11 years being unified in a marriage, references to time tunnels, apertures, and space-time fabric continuum, echo being consistently put into most all of the paragraph. Things that can also be used, this echo can also be used in a reverse patterning. The Minotaurs also represent each person's individual Minotaur that they had to overcome first in order to stay sane and continue in the harsh mind warfare that they had been strategically placed into. Peter Moon was a programmer at Montauk who wrote a book about the Minotaur and Black Pyramids and the Tibet connection and cave systems. Now, Echo has multiple Minotaurs that she has to overcome and encounter. And once she gets to that point, then she has a sort of freedom and a liberty. And then she represents a character that creates music in the bases and out of the bases. And her spirit represents like a freedom and a liberty and a strength and a beauty that the other kids that are familiar with bases would look up to as a strong point. So it's as if like 7 people are trying to interact and insert themselves into the narrative of the House of Leaves and almost distract you away from the real message, but that's not really the real intent of it. because his alters are talking at some points, and also it's a diary of time travel stations of identity, memory markers, timestamps that he pulls in and out, because he himself was being pulled in and out of a base room by handlers and coming back and forth at different time periods. And what happened with the original Johnny Boy, the Johnny Truant, was that he would make scenes because he didn't understand in certain situations what the other kids were doing, and the team members, because he would sometimes come into an event at the tail end of it and then try to transposition himself into the context when it wasn't making sense. And it's like not being fully able to manage that. So he was, for the most part, mind wiped from many people's memories, because he was also doing things randomly and in a rogue type way and interfering with certain systems, structures, and components, and letting kids out of cages prematurely and doing preemptive things before they could be processed and vetted and positioned to be used for specific purposes. And he was throwing wrenches in a lot of works, because at that time programs were mainly run by black hats, which now we have most of the bases under white hat control, and they're cleaned out. So JT, John Titor, tried to hide the diaries in the base room that him and a girl shared, but the diaries just couldn't be hid. They kept on like resurfacing back up, and it was just like a Jack in the Box type of masterpiece work that kept on popping up and then being taken in fragments, being taken in increments by certain handlers. And then his lover was finding the diaries randomly, so then the stories didn't make sense to her either. And then that angered her very much, to where she almost wanted to kill him, Poe's so-called brother, who got the manuscripts. So it's a series of unfortunate events of time travel, and many things unfolding like an accordion over a 100-year time frame that are harmonically opened at different junctures, because that's the ebb and flow of time itself. And it's nonlinear, and it's fluidic, and it's even possible to cross paths and to have linking effects because of that, and neural responses with a future version of yourself, or running into a clone of yourself, even if it's not face to face. This encounter sometimes occurs to either wake you up, where you can tag and trace your essence, your energy signatures. It can wake you up if you have a higher good, God-driven reality to be on par with that. Or it can be damaging and be a setback to you if you're not spiritually ready to know that, or if your future self was not what you intended it to be and is, say, like malevolent instead of benevolent. That can be shocking. So the actual super soldier children, they were put through the ringer. The ones who did the ones who survived, whose files are, still being monetized and used, they survived. And there's not many originals left. And that's why the original Johnny Truant is one of the original ones, and made sure that story got out. People like JT and other kids that had certain skills, like, say, he had skills with the Beast system. And that's why they called him Beast in X-Men, because he could understand computers, overlay systems, a lot of digitization and composite cloning of digitized formats and holographic things, and Beast software drives. And that's also why they made his character as Beast in X-Men to be the designer behind Cerebro, that Cerebro program that neuromeshed everybody together. to see past, present, and future, and an area where you could safely hide data, and like a mental palace that you could go into and view and look at things and have rational communications come out of it. So when people have this type of skill set, eventually black hats would manipulate them and blackmail them and eventually destroy people like this. So the white hats come in and they salvage and redeem these types of people. So thank God for the white hats for doing that. There's also mention of the director, and that's also used in travelers, time travelers. And there's also references to an ancient Masonic order and a lot of pelican talk. HOL, House of Leaves, whole is a breeze that was meant to blow down a certain house of cards. And also, in a way, it was a failed attempt to describe the effects of sleep tech, Dr. Sleep, and those days and events. It talks about thresholds, event horizons. It also talks about a 5.5 minute hallway. And in Poe's song, she also talks about a 5.5 minute hallway that they shared. Now, this was a underground military base hallway that they actually lived in. Other references were used for other scripts, for, say, like Goodfellas, Henry Hill, HH. I think people with the name HH, 88 is a time travel moniker code. And Karen was also used as a Jewish wife in that series too. Some of the kids were used to create media and other types of entertainment because they had photographic memory, and they could be a type of archivist because of that, to build upon, and a documenter of sorts. So hopefully that clears up some things of the mysteries surrounding and shrouding the House of Leaves, because they're all pertinent to the original John Titor, not the handler ones with that name and moniker, or the created versions of the original one. Because I said not many originals survived. Now the color, pelican black was also used to represent a color itself. And also like a stork delivering babies, having difficulties in birth processes, being de-aged, birth itself, babies, rebirth processing, being born again, being pegged and dropped into programs like a stork would. The word trope is used a lot too, and that's also used to represent like an outlet for channeling emotions and working through those. And it can also be used in conjunction to troops. And he's also represented as a soldier too. There's a caustics coding that's strewn throughout the writing too. Like I said, the completed transcription will require a master cipher text that won't even be available to the public. Page 117 is an allusion to the Old West and Westworld and a hotel. And then the tree that represents his mother as well, and the giving tree also has a higher meaning to that, about Heavenly Mother and divine protection and supernatural roots that are growing because of that connection, as some of the kids and super soldier kids knew the Elohim and had a relationship with the Elohim. So this transcends just a physical tree or a earthly parents type of figure or parents, because God says once we are like those roots that grow as a tree in his hands, then nothing can pluck you out of his hand. So House of Leaves also is like observing a shifting, malleable nature of a multidimensional reality, from an introspective moment in time where you have some peace to do that and some time to do that without being pulled into a different assignment. The letter Z is also important because it also alludes to a quantum machine. It's a quantum computing machine and project that's like a hyper CERN project right now, I believe in Asia or China, the Z machine. There's ampersands that also have markers that are meant to ask questions. Some are rhetorical, some are hypothetical. Lastrada is also a reference to losing sight of timelines and where you're going, and the quantum strings that are being pulled, retaining focus and trying to have and retain the desire of having perfect eagle eyes and getting away from the Pinocchio-like tricks. And it's also a reminder of the King Clown character in the silent film era and Buster Keaton, that type of time period, how to enter normal life again. There's also references to a baby and tragic loss of a child, a son, a baby. That was a baby that was left into a time anomaly when an extraction happened. A baby that was not supposed to be born but was born in the time travel project. The word Davis should be just used as Davis in the text, but it's not. That was a very key character in the feudal families wars and the times of slavery and the Civil War time periods. The thing about going blind, that's always like a fear through the story, and not being able to see is also because of an adjustment that happened to eye implants with JT. And there's also talk of missing soldiers and being used as a POW, because time travelers themselves forgive, but they don't forget that in certain time periods that they were actual prisoners of war in brief periods of time. So they suffered the same effects as a prisoner of war would have, and they actually had prisoner of war type programming, and would be sat in a chair at times. And it was due to mismanagement and mishandling of these assets. Okay, so there's also torn out pages. There's half notes. There's things that are presented as an allegory. Echo's echo chamber, a brother's journal that is not complete because of the heart pain that happened when the story was supposed to be written in completion. And this also represented like a twin pairing, and also represents Base's kids and SS brothers. There's also referencing to torture tech and mental calamities, trapped altars, and not being able to find reconciliation and consolation between brothers. So it's like sibling rivalry is inserted there too, with an apathetic standpoint of just giving up instead of finding closure with it. There's references to the mind feeling like a pipeline and things replaying in that mind field. So to me, this also represents and references organ pipes being played, because that was the first type of frequency mind control before we had radio and television. Many theaters that started the cloning used the organ pipes. Brain chips and other things could be brought back into time from future time points and labs once they figured out and calibrated how to utilize objects and send things back and forth and retain things in different parameters of time fields. Source referencing points. So his mind he also referenced as a source and a feeding port that he had to work through after going into the depths of the Minotaur. His mind is called a source field, and that is for Project Lucid and the AI codependency loops that were created by being stuck in those zones of Lucid, and the associations relocated therein, and associations relocated of people and people's names that were also labeled as hauntings. And a song was made called Haunted. So the capstone in the real story, I believe, will be revealed in its entirety as a lesson in personal accountability and responsibility and the untangling and healing up and agreements of all alters and personas and effects of time travel and cutting off spider webs and soul ties and the pain of unfulfilled love being fulfilled, multiple closures on many levels in all realms, dimensions, timelines, and spaces, and physical body healing, sealing of old time wounds and all the fragmentation that comes with that, and spirit of confusion and other things that can overshadow a person who's been in the Black programs. So it can be like a database of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and it can be an honorable and non-narcissistic ending if the writer so chooses to do so and present it as that, and it can subdue the labels of psycho and schizo that had many songs made about it, and the darkness that enshrouds it, and self-labeling of different personas that you feel are associated with these labels. Those can be turned into a compassion-oriented and healing type of path and close the door to escapism itself to present a better choose your own reality ending that is in agreement with the Most High Self and the Most High's will, which will be like a door of light and light coming into the construct of the architectural type of house that the House of Leaves was formulated upon. So this would be like an unfolding your own personal tea leaf reading into a better future that has a hope and a happiness to it that will also open up future undisclosed layers. So read at your own risk and just know that the best is yet to come.